Hello and welcome to Mythmakers. Mythmakers is the podcast for fantasy fans and fantasy creators, brought to you by the Oxford Centre for Fantasy. And today I am delighted that I am joined by Irish fantasy writer Peadar and Guilín. And before we go any further, Peadar, we were talking about names, because one of the things that global listeners will know is that when you look at an Irish name, it might take a few runs at the fence before you can get over it. Do you want to
If you
tell us
get
a little
over it
bit?
at all.
If you get like Saoirse, I've number of times.
Saoirse.
Saoirse. Number of times I've heard people say that name. So you're about to tell me that Irish is an old written language, which is one of the reasons why we get this difference.
Yeah. Well, there are lots of reasons. One of the interesting things is that you know in English, like why do we spell the word night with a GH? And most people will know it's because once upon a time the GH was pronounced, so it was nicht, and a night was a knicht. Right? Because we used to pronounce it. It wasn't for no reason. We didn't just decide, you know what, let's just throw in a few random letters in there. And the thing is then that writing tends to be standardized, and then spoken words just do whatever they want. And so you get these situations where the spelling is left behind by the pronunciation. Um, Now, if you can imagine a language that's much older than English, as a written language, you know, then you can imagine that it needs a lot more reforms, for the spelling to catch up with the pronunciation. However, Irish is pretty much pronounced as it's written. There are lots of H's. You'll see lots of H's in Irish words. Um, and this is kind of because when people were writing in Latin, the Latin alphabet was designed specifically for the Latin language, so you tended to have one sound for each letter. But then lots of other European countries, we adopted the Latin alphabet, and suddenly you have a language like Irish, which has way more sounds than there are letters in the alphabet. So the only way you can make one of these new weird sounds is by putting a H after it. So, for example, in English, we have ch in cheese. There was no ch in Latin, so they had to put a H after the C to cope with it. So Irish is not as far from the pronunciation as people think. It's just that we pronounce things differently, you know?
Yeah, and it's the fear of making yourself horribly, embarrassingly wrong. My husband once had, this is, we're going back a long time ago, he once had a summer job in a factory in the former West Germany, so dates it. And one of his jobs was to tell the people there, this is before the internet, if the people applying for the job in the factory were Irish women or Irish men, because it made a difference which stream they went into. So he had to sit there and say, oh yeah, that's, Neve, that's a girl. Colm, that's a guy, so he was responsible for getting the right job. So if you are an Irish person who was working in West Germany in the late 80s and you got the wrong job, it could have been his fault. Yeah.
That's
Anyway,
good.
yeah. Well, we're here mainly today to talk about your fantasy writing, of course, but we wanted to also have a chance to broaden it out and look at the presence of Ireland as a powerhouse in fantasy of its own in its own right, because your work reflects the environment, the landscapes of Ireland, the stories of Ireland, the long sort of folkloric traditions. And also it powers the actual plots of your books as well. I've started reading The Call in preparation to meeting you. So we're not talking a comfortable fairy tale world like Disney fairy tale world, are we? Tell us a little bit about your fantasy novel, The Call, and how it's set up.
Yeah, often when people ask me, what the call is about, I don't know what to say. As a writer, you know this feeling, but I usually say something like it's a bit like a Harry Potter where everybody dies. I'm exaggerating a little, But it's not nice. A bad time is had by most people, and part of that is our people often translate. There's an Irish word, she, which is often translated into English as fairy, and it's a really really bad translation. Because when you think of fairies, you're thinking of a beautiful girl in a diaphanous dress sitting on a toadstool at the bottom of the garden, or someone flying around with a magic wand and hitting the Disney castle. These are the kind of things that come to mind. Um, our our fairies, they're not like that. Uh, they don't like us. They don't help us out. They don't grant three wishes, right? Most of our superstitions are all about keeping away from them. A very famous example that people keep bringing up is how I think it was around 2004 they were building a vastly expensive motorway across Ireland, and at a certain point it was due to go through this field where there was a hawthorn tree belonging to the fairies, and they ended up spending millions to divert it around the tree. Um, so it's about keeping away, not having anything to do with them.
But your
Uh,
character's in the cool, unable to keep away because um, teenagers at a certain point are summoned, are called into the other world as objects of a hunt.
yeah, yeah.
Because they're
That
like the fox with the hounds after them, reversing our sort of expectations there. And as you say, it's got a high death rate.
yeah. No, it's a pretty high death rate. Um, yeah. I mean, it comes down to I said they don't like us. Why don't they like us? I mean, who could possibly dislike me? I'm lovely, right? It's hard to explain. Um, but in Ireland, there's a very old book called Leber Gabála Éireann, which means literally the Book of the Taking of Ireland, and it's a kind of a history of all the peoples who came to Ireland and what happened to them. The first group arrives and they all die of plague, and then another group arrives and they marry with another group, or they go to war with another group, or whatever. It's just one group after another, one wave of conquests, if you like, or one wave of invasions after another coming to Ireland. And the second last group are very unlucky. They're called the Tuatha Danann, the people of the goddess Danu, and they loved Ireland. They absolutely adored it. They called it the many-colored land, and they loved all the colors of it: the sea, the grass, the sky, absolutely everything. But they were a Bronze Age people, and the people who came after them were the Milesians, who are kind of said to be the ancestors of Gaelic Ireland, basically of the modern inhabitants of Ireland. And they beat the living daylights out of the Tuatha Danann in a big battle. And at the end of the battle, the people of the goddess Danu were all like, "Oh my goodness, you're going to slaughter us now." And the Milesians said, "No, oh, you're going to enslave us then." No. Well. What are you going to do? What we're going to do is we're going to share Ireland with you, half and half. Oh, that's so generous. So are we getting the north or are we getting the south? No. Are we getting the east or are we getting the west? No, 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 you're not. Well, what part are we getting then? You're getting the half that's underground. You're never going to see those beautiful colors again. Tough luck. So basically, the last line of this Book of Conquests or Book of Invasions or the Book of the Taking of Ireland's got lots of different translations for the name, but the very last line of it is something like the king of the Tuatha Danann led his people under the mounds. So he basically led him underground, and you've got all these mounds across Ireland, which we call in English fairy forts. And the Irish word for mound is she, which is, of course, the name of these people. They were the Aes She, the people of the mounds after that. And we're basically living on their home. We're basically living in their many colored land. So generally they don't like us. And the call was basically exploring the idea of what would they do to us if they could get their revenge. So the first thing was, where were they sent? Now we all know in history that when, one group defeats another group and takes over their land, what do they do? Do they give them the best land, people who are defeated? No, they don't. They usually send them somewhere awful, like Trail of Tears kind of idea,
Mm.
or when Cromwell came to Ireland, his big line here was to hell or to Connacht. In other words, either I'll kill you all or you can go to the worst land. And it's just a very common theme, like, throughout history. So I imagined in the book that where they were sent was the worst place possible. They go to a place called the Grey Land, which I hope kind of makes Dante's Inferno look very comfortable. Um, and from there they find a way to get their revenge. And what they do is each teenager once in their life can be pulled into this grey land. And once they're there for an entire day, they're hunted down. Um, and of course, the vast majority of them aren't going to get out of that situation. So that was the kind of basis of it.
So when you're talking about this sort of history based on the Book of Conquest, was that the
Yeah, or Book of Invasions, or the Book of the
Invasions?
yeah, that's got different. Yeah.
Yeah, is it when you're sort of using that as a background? Obviously, there's strong themes here of like history and colonization and class war and wealth war. Because I'm thinking of those, the enclosure movement in
Mm,
Scotland and England had a similar thing where
mm,
basically the poor people always get shafted in all these situations. So in a way, there's a kind of very obvious mapping on to real real
mm,
history. But also you've got the beautiful imagination of this idea of the magic that goes along with the Fey folk, which gives them power. Sort of gives them the power they didn't have before. So when you're using it, how much are you thinking, if at all, that you're writing a sort of modern morality tale, and how much are you just really sort of enjoying the fantasy and seeing where it takes you? Because there's always this balance between the theme an author might be exploring,
mm,
which can end up being messaging, which you don't want to do.
no, no,
So
no.
how did you go about it?
Well, I didn't deliberately aim for a theme,
Yeah,
but but we all have themes in us.
they
Like
emerge, don't they?
they emerge. I mean,
Yeah.
it's basically like if you have an apple and you drop it, you expect it to fall. You don't expect it to float there. You expect it to fall. It's just you've grown up in this world. This is your instinct. This is something that you just know to be true, right? Now, you may be wrong about that. You may just not have seen the apples that float. But as far as you are concerned, for your entire life, if you drop an apple, it falls. In the same way you were saying with the enclosures and so on, it's always the poor people who get shafted, right? Maybe you're wrong about that, but more than likely, you believe that to be completely true.
Mm.
So if you're writing a book and you want it to have some verisimilitude, you're not going to have the poor people not getting shafted most of the time, unless that's your story, like the poor people triumph and, you know, have a great adventure and finally save themselves from a good shafting or whatever.
Hooray.
Right. Hooray.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? Like if it's just the background to the world that you're writing,
Mm.
um, to your mind, the poor people get shafted. So that's not you making a political theme. That's just something you believe is true of the world. And therefore, when you're writing the world, that's what's going to come out. It's the same for me. I grew up on the border with Northern Ireland. Um, Person living next door to me at one point was arrested for being in a terrorist organization. Um, we used to do all our shopping on the other side of the border. We would come in on a Saturday morning, and the whole road would be covered in bottles and bricks from a riot of the night before. Everywhere I lived was covered in graffiti. People had very, very strong opinions. My father was a surgeon who operated on people who, were sometimes whisked in under great stress, having been attacked or whatever. Um, so this is going to have an influence. It's going to have an influence. Not necessarily. Here's me making a political point, but that's just what I grew up with. It's just what I
Mm.
saw. You know, and if I'd grown up somewhere else, I'd have seen something different and come out with something different. You know, so that was definitely in the background. Also in the background were all of these myths and legends. I mean, they were told in every school. Everyone knew these stories in the same way as a lot of people in Britain grew up with these kind of ladybird books. Rumpelstiltskin and so on, and Sleeping Beauty and all of these. You can probably still picture in your head the illustrations from some of them from when you were a kid, I'll bet, you know.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
yeah, we had those too, but we also had this other set, of stories. And again, they affect you, they're a very different way of looking at the world from those Ladybird books. Like, they have a very different mentality, but it influences you.
I mean, how local were your stories? Because I'm just thinking, I'm an Essex girl, which
Mm.
doesn't have a great reputation for the global relationship. But I do remember that the very local stories, aside from the things in the library,
Mm.
were to do with Epping Forest.
Yeah.
And there were a couple of things. There were two famous highwaymen who were local heroes,
Mm.
Dick Turpin and 16 String Jack.
We've heard of Dick Turpin.
Yeah, the 16 String Jack was a bit more local. There was a pub
Mm.
named after him. But also Boadicea or Boudica,
Oh
that
yeah.
she had a camp in Epping Forest, and of course she was a
Mm.
great figure of resistance. I didn't question this at the time, but since being old now, I look back and think, isn't it interesting how the local legends that were the ones which were highlighted were these, all of them in some way, resistance figures?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
Essex itself, because it's not Chelsea, had that feeling of being, we're a bit on the edge, we're a bit, got a bit chippy, we've got that sort of position. And so it was very local. We're talking 10, 20 mile radius of stories that were the ones told locally. So when you're thinking about your own upbringing, were there some very specific to your outside your front door, as well
Mm.
as the folklore of Ireland that
The,
sort of
the,
gone
the,
into the imagination?
yeah, no, that there are so many different layers,
Mm,
so many different layers. For example, in Irish legends, um, people who study them divide them into kind of distinct cycles, you know. And you have your stories of Finn McCool. This guy used to go about the place with his band of trusty warriors, a bit like Robin Hood, and his merry men, a very very similar kind of vibe to that.
yeah,
And even though he was a king as such, these stories were basically, the stories of ordinary people. They would tell these stories among themselves, and each member of the band would have stories about him or her. Do you know what I mean? Like they
yeah,
were all kind of stories of local people. But then you have like the famous epic of the Táin Bó Cúailnge about Cú Chulainn. Um, and and these were aristocratic stories, and
yeah,
told by professional bards, to kings and the like. So a very, very different set of stories, you know. But then of course you have your little local folk tales, a bit like when you go and see a place in Essex and says, oh, that's Boudica's camp.
yeah,
I mean, it's really, really normal in Ireland. Like there isn't a rock or a piece of grass out there that someone says, oh yes, that's the place where such and such. For example, a dolmen. Um, in Ireland, the Irish word for dolmen is laba, which means bed. And so one of the famous stories is the story of Diarmuid and Gráinne, the runaway lovers. So this guy Finn McCool, when he's older, when he's an old man, he decides to marry this pretty young girl. She isn't having any of it. So she basically tricks one of his warriors into running away with her. And now they're kind of on the run, and they've got like, the army after them, trying to catch them. And everywhere you see one of these dolmens, they say, "Oh yes, that's where they spent the night." That's one of their beds. That's where they spent the night when they were running away. So this is very common. And then you've some very, I mean, how crude am I allowed get? Am I allowed to get crude?
Probably don't get us an E rating.
Not an E rating. Okay,
Yeah.
well, there's a place uh called there was a queen called Queen Maeve, and there was a place called Maeve's, uh, a pit where she had a week. Am I allowed to say that?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
yes. It's called something a bit worse than that, slightly worse than that. But a place where she had a wee, and basically she's watching this battle, and her troops are engaged, and she's on top of a hill, and she says, "Right, I can't watch anymore. I desperately need a wee." And her generals are saying, "No, no, my lady, you can't. It's very close. We need your inspiration. We need you here. But I desperately need a wee. No, no, my lady, you've got to stay. You've got to." Finally, the battle ends. She runs and wheezes so hard that this massive pit is carved into the earth, and and
Very
and it's
earthy story,
it's
but
it's
yeah.
named for this. It's named for this. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's really common.
So the sort of the cliche, and forgive me for repeating it to you, but the cliche of an Irish writer does lean into this sense of the sort of mystery and the legends and the poetry and all of these kind of things. Do you think that's a fantasy of itself, and do you resent it, or do you think it's a helpful and something true about a sort of general tendency amongst Irish writers?
I think there's every kind of writer. Yeah.
Of course there is. I just meant that there's a sort of there's a, I don't know, expecting you're going to be a good storyteller and perhaps start breaking into song every 5 seconds. It's that sort of cliche. I have met
Yeah,
Irish writers like that. So there
yeah,
are
no, no, but there definitely are. There definitely are people like Brendan Behan, and there were
yeah,
plenty who used to break into song and were very good at it, and plenty who love to tell stories, and plenty who are singing drunkards and everything. I mean, they absolutely exist. What I will say is when I'm trying to sell a book like The Call,
yeah,
it's an incredibly helpful stereotype. You know, that's you will definitely sell more if you're from Ireland than if you're from, I don't know, Hungary, even though Hungary has amazing folk legends, but it's not the point. It's
yeah.
just we've got this cliche working for us, when I try and sell my science fiction, not so much, you know.
Yeah, it's interesting that one, isn't it? Because I think there is a some countries have really strong global identities,
Mm,
and others kind of fly beneath the radar and have to explain themselves more. And I think particularly because of the strong Irish contingent in America,
mm,
I think, as you say, there is like a appetite to reconnect to something maybe authentic or something from someone else's past, that might help you there. Um, but I was just wondering if you felt it was fair or actually a shoe that no longer fits because we're living in a modern world where everything is less local, more global.
things have an effect, and the effects last a long time. Like, I mean, everybody knows, for example, how America started with, I mean, the American state with people throwing tea into Boston Harbor because they didn't want to pay tax on it, and how now it's a notoriously like tax unfriendly country. You know what I mean? Like, I mean,
Mm,
it has an effect. These things last. In Ireland, one of the reasons we were so lucky and so blessed to have all these legends. I mean, they have them in every country. It's absolutely natural that it gets dark and you're sitting around the fire and you start spinning a tale. and also that it's dark. And did something move in the shadow? I'm a bit scared now. I'll make up an explanation for it. I mean, that probably happened absolutely everywhere around the world at the same time. We were kind of lucky in that we had monks at one point in when a lot of places were going through what was unfairly called the Dark Ages. We had monks. We had so many monks that if a monk scratched himself, two other monks fell out. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
we had tons of them, and they wrote everything down, absolutely everything. Recipes for beer, medicines, spells, curses. We know almost more about medieval Ireland than almost any other society at the time. They just wrote absolutely everything down. And one of the things they wrote were the legends of the day. And like there's an example where there's some monk writing, I was told to write these down. I don't believe in them. It's all just pagan nonsense, full of sex and adventure and fighting and fun and romance, and I'm not enjoying it at all, not even one tiny little bit. I'm just writing it down.
It's a pretty good blurb, though.
Yeah, but that's
I've
what
got
I'm
the back
saying.
of a
Like
book.
they clearly did like it, you know, they clearly did enjoy
Yeah.
it. And they wrote them down with gusto, you know, and so we have them now. And then back in the 1930s, like a very short time after Ireland became independent, one of the first things the state did was it paid money, like it was like the poorest country in Europe, more or less at the time, but it paid money for people to go around with very primitive recording devices, to all the old people and collect their stories and record them, you know. So these things have an effect, you
Mm.
know. They stick around a bit. They do affect people. And then you'll know that up until about 15 years ago, um professional artists, which includes writers and storytellers and things like that, did not pay tax in Ireland on their art earnings, right? So the country looked after them, and even more recently, like in the last 2 or 3 years, we have this you know, universal basic income for artists, including writers. Um,
I did not
so
know that.
yeah, well,
Oh,
it's only a certain number every year get it,
okay.
but it was an experiment that they're doing. Like it shows that this is a country that cares about the arts, about writers, that values it as an export, if you like, but not just as an export, but just values it. And that has an effect. It means that when you're growing up, you it's in the water already that this is a country that respects what you do. You like making up funny stories. Go for it, kid, because you know you have a chance here.
That that's really unexpected, actually, to me, because what you've just described there is a part. I mean, I was aware of the long Irish tradition, but I hadn't really factored in just the careful curation that's gone on since medieval times onwards, which has enabled that to happen. These things don't just survive by chance, do they?
Hmm,
It's been a decision by a society to protect and to remember. I spent some years living in Poland
hmm,
shortly after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and one of the things that was um, sort of present in Poland was sort of rediscovery of their own sort of national story and their uh, their own literature and traditions, which had kind of got flattened by sort of communism and the propaganda of the earlier era. These things can survive even under adverse circumstances, but it
yeah.
means that they you have to dig them up and say that this matters. Pan Tadeusz, it matters.
Hmm,
Uh, yeah, no, that's really interesting. We Just before we started recording, I was talking to you about how one of Tolkien's most famous essays is called On Fairy Stories. And he was
hmm,
writing to re-establish fairy stories as a serious subject for academic respect. Because there had been, oh, they're for children. And there's nothing really in Irish stories that is particularly for children, is there?
Oh no, there are. Of course there are.
Or
It's
should I say only for children?
yeah. I mean, there's a huge variety. There's a huge variety of stories in the Irish tradition. I told you they wrote everything down. Like I mean,
Mm.
there's a massive amount there. It's hard to get your brain around it. Some of it is
I didn't phrase that
absolutely
correct.
filthy, but
Yeah,
some is funny. A lot of it is tragic, but it's not all. Like you know, there's everything.
I didn't phrase that very well. What I meant was fairy stories had been relegated to the nursery. As if
Oh, I see. Yeah.
that's what I meant. It's the only place that you read fairy stories was as a young child in the nursery.
Hmm.
Whereas when actually the tradition of fairy stories, which Tolkien is talking about, is actually more in it's better really calling it folklore,
Hmm.
really, because it's for society. And obviously there are some tales you would tell to younger children and not want to scare them too much. You want them to go to sleep at night. But there's also the element that they grow with you and they're for all ages. And it seems as though what you're describing in Ireland is that full spectrum storytelling tradition.
Yeah. Yeah. No, the there's some amazing stuff. Like some of it is absolutely hilarious, and some of it is like very science fiction, you know, like
Mm,
some real kind of like there's an amazing concept which I'm sure lots of traditions have, but it's very clear in the Irish tradition where you have two worlds overlapping
mm,
at the same time. And I absolutely love it. Like there's one famous story of you know, these people who are working in the fields around a monastery and they look up and they see a ship just floating through the air. And at a certain point, the ship gets caught. The anchor of the ship is caught on a tree, like down on the farm. And someone jumps off the ship and they swim down through the air and they're trying to free the anchor from the tree, but then they start to drown. So one of the peasants climbs up and cuts the anchor free. And then the person can go back up to the ship and everyone in the ship waves down at the people in the farm and off the ship goes again.
and it's
So
so suggestive, isn't it? That one,
yeah,
mysterious encounter.
yeah,
Yeah,
I think it's amazing.
yeah. So, Pada, where are you going to be going next in your writing? Are you returning to another form of art? Where are you going in your sort of rich subsoil of ideas you've got around you?
Yeah, so I have I mean based on that idea I just said there are two worlds overlapping at the same time. I have a science fiction book just about to come out called The Sword Garden.
The Sword
Um,
Garden.
The Sword Garden.
Yeah.
And it looks like a fantasy book. Like when it starts, I won't say much more than this, but when it starts, that you have this city which is the richest city in an empire, which is about to rebel. And one of the things the city is famous for is ghosts. So everyone in this city is, I would say, dark skinned, but the ghosts are white skinned and wear furs. And when they breathe out, like smoke comes out of their mouths, which is, you know, a rather extraordinary thing
Mm.
that the people find. Um, and so that's kind of how it starts, you know. So again, you've got your two worlds kind of overlapping there, you know. So
That sounds
that's
that
yeah.
sounds fascinating. So I look forward to seeing that. So I always like to broaden the focus at the end of a chat with another author, thinking about all the wonderful fantasy worlds that we've read about or watched on film. And I wanted to ask, in honor of your story, The Call,
Hmm.
in all the fantasy worlds, they're all available to you. Where would
Hmm.
you most like to take part in a magical contest or survival contest in your sense, but to be the winner of a contest in a magical realm?
Well,
There are
if
some I wouldn't want to be, you can rule out,
yeah,
like, Hunger Games, for example, you know? No.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess the world I found most alluring There was a book by a guy called was it David Zindel. I think David was his first name. Zindel was definitely his second name. And the book was called Neverness. Um, and it's basically this city that's basically an Arctic wonderland, and everyone sits around in giant chairs drinking hot chocolate, and the streets are called glidderies because you just skate is all you do from place to place. Um, and it just absolutely captivated me when I saw it. For a magical contest, if I was going to win it, I would if I was going to win. If I was going to lose, definitely not. But if I was going to win, um, possibly Michael Swanwick's The Iron Dragon's Daughter. It's a horrific world, but the well off do very well indeed. That. Um, but the world building, it's basically a mix of the modern and the fantastical. So one of the images in it is you see a photograph of grinning elves with M16s atop of a big pile of dead orcs in one of their foreign wars. Um, it's
So,
an amazing book.
so to answer the question for me, I was thinking. I mean, there's most magical contests like your own are very much stinging the tail thing. So the Triwizard
Yeah,
Cup, you end up being in a graveyard with Voldemort. It's not really.
yeah.
They don't have very good reputation. So perhaps I'd play safe and I would go for Alice in Wonderland because everyone gets prizes.
Oh yeah.
That
I,
seems to be the safest place for a magical contest.
I would be terrified to go to one, to be
Well,
honest
true,
with you.
true, yeah. Thank you
But
so
yeah.
much for joining us, and we look forward to saying the title of your book again.
Oh, the Sword Garden.
The Sword Garden. There we go. So
Oh,
look out for that. Thank you very much.
thank you very much indeed.
Thanks for listening to Mythmakers Podcast, brought to you by the Oxford Centre for Fantasy. Visit oxfordcenterforfantasy.org to join in the fun. Find out about our online courses, in-person stays in Oxford, plus visit our shop for great gifts. Tell a friend and subscribe wherever you find your favourite podcasts worldwide.